Good afternoon and thanks for joining our webinar. I'm Randy Sainer, a beef systems educator with Nebraska Extension and the Center for Agriculture Profitability. Today's webinar is part of our Center for Agriculture Profitability's weekly series coming to you every Tuesday at noon Central. Find a complete schedule and a host of helpful resources on our website at cap.unl.edu. Early weaning beef calves can be a helpful management practice for many cow-calf operations, especially where quality forages may be lacking due to drought and other factors. How you manage the calves depends largely on the age of the animals and the producer's goals. This webinar will explore different options and best practices for early weaning, covering nutrition, cost, and potential benefits. Joining me today is Karla Wilke, Associate Professor and cow-calf Specialist in the Department of Animal Science at UNL. Hi, Karla.
Hi, Randy. How are you?
Good. Matt Stockton is Associate Professor and Extension Agriculture Economist based in North Platte. Thanks for joining us, Matt.
You bet. It's a pleasure.
And Jay Parsons is a Professor and Farm and Ranch Management Specialist in the Department of Agriculture Economics. Hi, Jay.
Hi, Randy, and thanks everyone for being here.
So we'll go ahead and start with Karla Wilke. She's going to talk about early weaning calves and some of the management factors that we use. Thanks, Karla.
Thank you, Randy. Okay, we'll get this started. Okay, can everyone see that? Okay.
Yep.
Okay. Okay. So we're just going to talk about some of the nutritional and management aspects of early weaning calves when you have to. So early weaning could really be defined as any time ahead of when a producer traditionally weans. So it's changing your system a little bit. Traditionally, most calves are weaned between 180 and 210 days of age, and most early weaning is 90 to 150 days of age. There are some cases which would be considered rare or extreme for beef calves that are weaned as early as 45 days of age, but that's not as common. Regardless, whether it's that early or a more traditional 90 days or better, how you manage the calf depends largely on the age of the calf as well as the goals for that calf. And I put this picture in here because these are March, April born bottle calves. So they were raised on a bottle. They were weaned off the bottle in June, and the picture was taken July 21st. And so the reason I included that was because so many producers get a little nervous and scared when they talk about having to early wean because they're afraid they're going to end up with dinky pot-bellied calves if they're not on the cow. And so I thought these calves were filling out pretty nice. And so I just wanted to include that to help them see that if we do it right, we don't come out too bad. So how we make that happen depends a lot on whether we understand what the calf is getting its nutrition from. And this is a slide from some research that I did like 100 years ago when I was in grad school. And we actually used fecal bags or diapers on the calves to estimate fecal output. So we had an idea of their intake, and then we used weigh suckle weigh to determine the cow's milk production. And so I put together this slide to show you that a calf at 90 days of age, 120 days of age, or 150 days of age, given their weights at that time, which would still be fairly similar, I guess. I expressed forage intake as a percent of body weight on an organic matter basis, and milk as a percent of body weight, and then pounds of organic matter per day of both the forage and the milk. And I use organic matter because that takes out not only the moisture like dry matter would to put it on an even basis, but it also takes out ash content, which does account for mineral intake, which is small. But the other thing is that calves are bad about eating dirt and stuff like any other baby mammal, always sticking stuff in their mouth. So it kind of helps you get down to the nutrient aspect of it. So that's why we put it on that basis. But what I wanted to show you is that the 3-month-old calf is getting a lot more of its intake percentage from milk than the 5-month-old calf. And there is some decrease in milk production as the lactation curve decreases for the cow. But what's really happening is that as the calf gets bigger, he's developing his rumen better and more intake is from forage. So sometimes we get in the mindset where we think that the calf doesn't eat much forage at all until after he's weaned, when in reality, he's starting to develop his rumen very early on, but the capacity of that rumen is very, very small, and especially small at 3 months of age. And so if we're going to wean at that point in time, we have to understand where he's getting his nutrition and what we have to replace for him in that situation. So milk provides really important, highly available nutrients, including protein and energy. And so, when the calf suckles, the cow, the esophageal groove closes. So most of the milk does not enter the rumen. It enters the abomasum where it bypasses the rumen. And so then that can be digested in the abomasum and absorbed in the small intestine. So even though milk is highly digestible, it goes straight to the tissue level in the animal for muscle growth and structure growth, bone growth, so the calf grows. So if we can replace some of that milk with a source of rumen undegradable protein and energy like distillers grains, those, even though they enter the rumen, they're not very digestible for the microbes there. And so then the calf gets that nutrition further down the track for muscle and bone structure. And that helps us to put some growth on that calf and not end up with small fat calves like we can if we're not careful, if we put too much starch in the diet early on. So passage rate and digestibility are very important. A lot of times if we're feeding cows in confinement, we use crop residues like ground corn stalks or wheat straw as kind of the basis for that diet, because those are usually our cheaper forage sources. The problem with those for a calf is that the residues are low quality, and so digestion and passage rate through the rumen are very slow. And the young calf needs something that is digested very quickly, so that the passage rate moves on through, and then intake can be frequent. Because remember, we talked about them having that really small rumen, they need to eat small meals frequently. And if we have a lot of really poor quality forage in their diet, then that doesn't happen for them. Okay, so this is at my house and somebody messed up and the weaned calves got the diet that the cows were supposed to get. And immediately you could tell because they really backed off on intake. And so that's what had to happen. That had to be removed and we had to start over. And you can see the residue and the straw in it. They it was not as good a diet for them as I would have liked for the target that I had. Now, if a producer's like, well, I'm really not targeting much gain, I'm just trying to hold a holding pattern, then that might be a little different. But again, it depends on your goals. So I just threw in an example diet. If you had a 300-pound calf, then you were trying to target 2 pounds a day gain on an as-is basis, 3 pounds of dried distillers, 7 pounds of a mix of oat hay and alfalfa, a really good trace mineral package that has some really available zinc and copper would probably get you there. But as you notice, the hay part of that I tried to put in there would be something that would be pretty nutritional, pretty high quality, pretty decent passage rate through there. Wouldn't have to be oats and alfalfa, could be some brome hay if it was higher quality. You know, there's other grass hays, there's other things, but the point is it needs to be something that they can digest and consume enough of to make up that, to get the nutrients to gain whatever you're wanting them to gain. If calves have eaten fermented feeds with the cow, they're more inclined to eat them at weaning. Typically, we encourage people not to put silages and wetter feeds like wet distillers in the diet. If the calf has always been out on grass or something, and then it comes into the lot, and this is its first exposure to harvested feeds, they may not eat that very well at first, may not be very interested in it. And then if it sits in the bunk because they weren't interested in it and it starts to mold or get hot, then they really may not be interested in it. And so we kind of encourage people to avoid those unless, as in this picture, these calves have been eating a diet, and even though it has the residues in it, they've also at that point still had milk from the cow, but they've now become very familiar with wet distillers and silage. And so just replacing the straw with a higher quality forage, once they're weaned, these calves actually take right off on that diet. Another really important point that I want to make is that this is a picture of month-old, so 30 days-ish, 30, 45-day-old calves in late April. So it's really still pretty nice, mild temperatures out. Look at them all coming in and getting a drink. If you are early weaning a calf in August, how important is it that that calf be able to reach the water? Very important from a hydration standpoint, but also because rumen development requires water, intake requires water, rumen development requires feed intake. So you see the connection in the pattern there. So make sure that small young calf can reach the water. 12 inches of bunk space per calf helps make sure they have plenty of room to eat. You got to have plenty of feed available in the bunk, because remember, they're going to eat small, frequent meals. You don't want everything gone within an hour of it being put out. This could mean that you need to sort calves. When we early wean, a lot of calves, because of the time of the year they were born versus a calf that was born 30 days before, maybe smaller, milk production in the cows still has a bigger effect. Eventually calves kind of even out in their size, but if you're early weaning, you may have some pretty different sizes. Remember, you may want to sort those calves, and the smallest ones may not do a very good job of competing with the bigger calves because they can't eat enough at a time. So think about sorting. Making sure the pens will hold the calves prior to weaning is critical. These little turkeys here, they crawl in and out of this pen all the time, but they go back because their mom is in there. If you early wean a small calf and you take his mom away and he can crawl out of the pen, I promise you he will, and that's a headache. So we want to make sure there's room, or that we can hold them in the space that we give them. Proper nutrition before weaning helps you a lot to have healthy calves. They need a dry, clean space and a lot of room to spread out so that they don't share illness. Work with the local vet to adjust your vaccination protocol to accommodate the early weaning, and have a game plan for treating illness before it happens. These are some links to some NEB guides and to an article that I wrote on early weaning. You can find those at beef.unl.edu or extensionpubs.unl.edu. And those are very helpful tips for weaning time on the management side of things. And that's really all I have for the management and nutrition.
Thanks, Karla.
Thank you.
We'll hold questions off for the end if that's okay. Next, we'll have Matt Stockton, and I will talk a little bit about cost, the cost part of the equation. So Matt, you want to share your slides?
Yes, I do. Can everybody see those?
Yes.
Good. Kind of plain, but there. Karla did a great job, talked about the physical management and the concern and the productivity of calves and the things that you should consider. And I think that's really good. I want to talk a little bit about some other considerations. I think the first thing that you need to realize is why are you doing this? What is the reason that you're going to early wean? And I think that there's a lot of different reasons. Now, this year, I would think that maybe a drought consideration, like you want to conserve pasture. And I suppose that the earlier you consider it, the more pasture you're going to save, but then you got that trade-off of taking care of the calf and the cost, and there's some other things there to consider. And that's what I want to talk about along with some other things. So in other words, what are you gaining from early weaning? Are you gaining time, satisfaction, income, better resource use, risk reduction? Are you reducing your risk, or are you increasing your risk? And maybe you're even just getting happiness from doing it, makes you feel good to do it. And that's not a bad reason either, but that's not necessarily the reason I would do it. Okay, for example, if you wanted to conserve pasture for cows, which in a year like this may be something to consider. The idea is really simple. In other words, what are you going to gain and what are you going to lose? In other words, every time you make a decision, you're going to do things differently. When you do things differently, you're going to have to change the way you've done things. And so there's things you're going to do that you didn't do, and there's going to be some costs that you might incur you wouldn't normally incur, and then there's going to be some things that you gain as far as things you didn't do that you gain from as well. And so you're going to have to make those decisions, because it's a simple decision in a sense that, hey, I'm going to do it, but it's complicated in the sense that, okay, so what are the repercussions and what does that mean as far as selling the calf? Is the calf going to be the same size? What have I got to do with the ration? Do I have the facility to keep the calves? I mean, there's a lot of things that you need to ask when you're doing this. And so what I recommend is doing something like building a spreadsheet. And that's what I've done here is I've taken some, and you don't have to use a spreadsheet. You can use a calculator and a piece of paper. It's not that complicated. And we're going to go through a couple things. Randy, did you have anything to say?
No, I think we're to where we want to visit. So we're going to talk a little bit about feed costs and what it's going to cost and what the alternatives are. So go ahead, Matt.
Thank you. So the first thing in thinking about this is, okay, so if I'm going to remove calves from cows, what is that going to save me as far as pasture? Well, we usually measure pasture in AUMs. In this case, we're going to call an AUM a 1,200 pound cow, but technically it's a 1,000 pound animal on pasture is an AUM. And in a spreadsheet like this, I can change this number. This is the 1,000 pounds. So the cow size per AUM. So this animal unit months, and that's how much, it's going to take. That's what I'm talking about. If I have a 1,000 pound animal and that's what I'm considering is I'm going to feed for a month, then that would change all the other calculations because they're chained together. But we're going to use 1,200 pounds because basically, in other words, I'm running pasture by the head, okay, if you will, per month. I am paying so much per month for a certain size for a cow, and my cows average 1,200 pounds, so I'm calling that an AUM. That is not what an AUM is, but that's what we're going to call for this case. So let's say my calves are gaining about 2.5 pounds a day. So that's what I'm expecting. They're going to, from the milk and from the cow, they're going to get about 2.5 pounds of gain a day. So my expected normal weaning weight, let's not go 600, let's go 550 pounds. And that will change depending on how old your calves are and how long and whatever you're doing and weaning, and it could change by season, and there's a bunch of things. But basically that's when I'm expected to, in the fall, I'm going to wean these calves November, December, or October, whatever it is. And now I'm talking about, okay, so what if I wean them 100 days early? So I wean them 100 days before, and that's what I've got written here is 100 days. So basically, if that's the case and they gain 2.5 pounds a day, they're going to weigh 550 pounds. It calculates the fact that I need 300 pounds, 300, they'll weigh about 300 pounds at the time that I wean them, if I wean them early. Well, what does that mean? Well, it means that the number of AUMs, which is the 300 pounds, is a certain percentage of the 1,200. And basically they keep growing every day, of course, and they're 550 when they were off the cow. So I can take that number, multiply it by the days, and end up with the number of AUMs saved per month. So that's the number of AUMs I save by weaning the calf early per month. So if I get 2 months and 10 days, which is the 100 days approximately, I'm going to get a total of 1.18 AUMs. Okay. So now, Randy, did that come across,
Yes.
you think, in a way that's understandable?
So I would say that 1.8 is due to the fact that those cows are not lactating anymore. They're requiring less grass. And that's what we're figuring in savings. Not let alone what the calves are eating, but that basically you're saving on the cows because they're not lactating, so their requirements go down.
Right, and the calves aren't stomping or eating or doing anything out of the pasture, basically. So that's the amount of grass that you're saying you now have available. You wouldn't have had available if you'd left the calves on the cow. It's an approximation. You may use different numbers for that, but that's the number that I came up with. It's basically, what did you say, 11 days more for the cow if I take the calf off on a monthly basis?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, so that adds up to be about the same number, actually, for that size calf. The larger the calf, obviously, the different number changes. All right, so let's say I had 600 cows. And that's this number here. But with 600 cows, that adds up to be about 708 AUMs, if you will. That's how many AUMs I save. Well, if I want to maintain 500 cows, which I have a different number, and I want to maintain them for 3 months, I need 1,500 additional AUMs. So I'm a little short. And that's one thing you got to calculate. So basically, once you know how many AUMs per calf and how many calves you wean, you can approximate how much extra pasture, assuming that the AUMs are out there, that's how much AUMs you're going to save by taking the calves off the cow. There's a lot of different ways to figure it. A lot of different things you can do. Now, this basically at $35 an AUM, that amounts to about $41.32 per cow saved by taking the calf from the cow on the AUM pasture cost, assuming you're going to keep them on pasture for the rest of the season and you have enough grass, and that's what you're paying for that grass. And that's a pretty big assumption. You can change that kind of information, but I figured that out. So that's kind of what you did first, is you kind of figured out, okay, this is how much feed I'm going to save. This is what's going to happen. Now you can start making decisions on, okay, so if I save that feed and that feed's available, I can now extend the length of time I graze my cows. Now, if you don't have the feed available, then you're going to have to figure something else out as far as feeding them. So we did another thing down here at the bottom. We said, okay, so you pay $180 a ton for hay, and 1 ton of hay is about 58.82 cows fed, and at $180 a ton, that's $3.06, and that would be a day, and that would be times the 30 days, and that would be then it's going to cost you $91.80 to keep a cow on hay. Now, prices can change. What you feed your cows, size of your cows can change. The number of cows fed per ton makes a difference. There's a lot of things in here. So if you kind of know what those numbers are, you can change those and make them work. But you can calculate basically what it's going to cost you to feed a cow for that long, or how long you want to feed the cow. So in other words, if you don't have pasture, you can figure out what the hay cost is going to be. When you figure out what the hay cost is going to be, you can then make a decision on, is it worth buying the hay and keeping the cow, or is there some other alternative I can find? And that's where people begin to look for things like corn stalk grazing, or they look for other alternatives and things like that. The other thing is, if you start early enough on this sort of thing, like that you're going to have maybe short on pasture, or short on roughage, so to speak, you can begin to eliminate maybe cows that you're gonna cull, and maybe cull early. There's some things you can do there financially that might be more advantageous than just feeding. But once you know the cost of feeding the cow, then you can start making those decisions, especially when you know the value of the cows. Comments, Randy?
Yeah, so on this hay price, when we looked up above, we're short on amount of grass we need to feed those cows. So you're gonna probably have to, like you said, either go corn stalks or feed hay. So it's going to show you the cost of that extra cost you're going to have in hay. And that's what we're showing here at the bottom, because we show that we don't have enough AUMs to get those cows through the year. So we're probably going to have to feed some hay.
So in fact, what we did is if we saved the 708, let's say the pasture still had 708 because we weaned early, which is what we're assuming. And then we took that, we need 1,500 because we have 500 cows we want to maintain through the next year. We're going to have 791 AUMs short. Well, 791 AUMs, and then we multiply the hay costs and the AUMs and everything else. Basically, that's a $72,000 cost for buying the hay that we didn't have, and that's something you compare. So what if we had done this a lot earlier in the season and say, well, I know things are really bad, and I really want to get the calves off as soon as possible, and I did this for like, I don't know, if the calves, if you go 210 days and you I don't know, you say I can go 150 days, wean at 150 days early. How does that change everything? And so you do that. So basically what that would do with the same price of hay and the same number of AUMs, assuming that the AUMs and everything are the same, you're going to end up with only $54,000 cost. So weaning early would have saved you like $20,000 or so in hay costs. But those are the kinds of things that you need to think about, like earlier in the season and what's happening. Because see, the AUMs per calf, it went down on an average monthly basis, but it went up because it's more number of days. It went to 1.51s per calf, and 906 were the total number of AUMs you saved, and you ended up with still the 1,500. So you only had 593 you had to buy. And that's why you calculate that, so you can know, okay, how many do I have left? What do I have left out in the pasture, and what I've got to do? And so that's why early weaning, as far as drought is concerned, can help you out in that situation. Any other comments, Randy?
No, I think that sums it up. The key is really the earlier the better as far as saving AUMs, especially if you're short of pasture.
Right, and I suppose it's getting late in the season. We're probably, should have talked to you a couple months ago, but it's still a good thing to remember whenever that situation arises. Now, we talked a little bit about, Karla has showed a ration, and we just did some rough analysis. We had grass hay and we had alfalfa hay of good quality, and our mineral cost and our DDGS. Now, she figured about 3% of your body weight of the calf, according to that ration, would be what the calf ate. And so that would be this first column here, and it would be 10 pounds a day of feed. By the time the calf grows at that 2 or 2.5 pounds a day, whatever you got going, they're going to be consuming about 16. So on average, they're going to consume about 13.25 if you take a linear middle of all that. So that's the average of those calves. And so basically what you're talking about, that feed cost, if we had these values in here, is going to be $1.49 per head per day. For that 100 days that you fed those calves, that's going to be $149, okay, which is somewhere. Where did we put that? I'm looking at that. Oh, that's the 100 days. So basically 149 for the 100 days. It should be 149. What's the deal here? Oh, it's 150 days. We'll change that back to 100. That's what the problem is. Okay, I was going to say, wait a minute, that's not right. Okay, there we go. With 100 days, you've got $149 just to maintain the calf for that 100 days. And you got a $50 yardage fee, which is labor, fencing, and anything else that you might have, whatever you're going to do extra because you weaned that calf early. And so you end up basically $199.46. Did I leave anything out, Randy?
Nope, that should do it.
Okay, so basically you're saying, okay, so each calf's going to cost me $200 more. So now what the question I asked myself is, we figured, Randy and I looked at some literature and stuff, and it's about a $25 per 100 price slide between a 550 and a 300, about a 300-pound calf, which is what we've got up here. We've got a 300-pound calf if we sold the calf, or we got a 550-pound calf if we keep the calf for the 2.5 pounds a day. So approximating that, we say, okay, so if I'm going to if I go out today and price the calf when I'm early weaning at $1.65 a hundredweight, okay, I could sell that calf for about, and let's say there's $2, because that's what the price slide would say. That's $2 a pound. How much difference would I have between selling the calf now and selling in the future? And basically there's a $600 now or $907 in the future. So that gives you about $307 to feed the calf and do all the things for the calf. Well, we look at that and say, okay, we can do that. And then we basically look at this, which is taking this number, which is the cost of hay I saved, basically, or the cost of hay I still fed the cows with, because they're still out on pasture. I add that, plus then I subtract that from the difference, and that gives me how much money I can pay to feed those calves and come out even, kind of break even. And basically, that's about a 27 cents a pound for every pound gain. Profitability. Now, if this price drops like in the future, so let's say I say today it's $1.65, but come the time when I'm going to go sell the calf, it's only $1.50. What happens? I basically am losing money because I'm losing 6 cents a pound for every pound of gain, because it's costing me $199 to feed the calf, but I'm only getting $183.68 worth of calf back from all that process. So it would have been better off selling the calf. I would have made 6 cents more a pound approximately for the weaned calf at the end. So basically, those are the kinds of things you want to look at. And you can figure out just by some simple numbers that they'll tell you, okay, if I do this, what happens? If I do that, what happens? And you can calculate those things, and you should calculate those things in making the decisions. So you get an approximation of what you're going to do. So basically the ending price, ending value of the calf is going to make a big difference on what you may or may not do. And I set this up so the examples, but if you got $1, let's say you got $1.65 now, but in the, or no, sorry, that's the wrong thing. I got to put a decimal place in there, right, Randy? Okay,
Yep.
there you go. So if I get $1, what if prices went up in the future? So I get $2 here, right? But I'm gonna get $1.75 in the future because prices are going up. Wow, all of a sudden it becomes a much better deal, 49 cents a pound profitability. So it really depends on the expectation of the prices, the trend of the prices, when you should sell the calf. And so it's important that you kind of know that difference. You know what it's going to cost you to get the calf to where you want it. When you know where you're going to get the calf where you want it, then you can start talking about, okay, then this is the prices that I need to get to make this work for me. Comments, Randy?
Yeah, Matt. And I think this kind of goes to the point of Jay Parsons, who's going to talk next about maybe how you could lock in that price now before you lock it in now for the future. And at least it gives you, reduces some of your risk in some cases. So he's going to talk about that next. But I think this is the key thing. Know what the prices look like. And right now they're at that $1.65. So it's going to depend on what they are, but there's some things you can do to maybe protect some of that risk. That's all I had to add, Matt.
With that, I turn it over to whoever's next.
Jay Parsons will be next. Thanks, Matt.
Okay. Thanks, guys. Can you see that okay?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm tasked with taking a look at market risk protection, as Randy just mentioned, and in particular where we're at today in terms of expectations. Because under the scenario that you are in a situation where you need to early wean, of course, selling the calves is an option. Karla went through some of the things that you could do from the feeding side, and Matt went through the costs, and then we talked about break even. But of course, it all is a matter of what you, in the end, you want to profit. So you want to know what things are going to look like on the end. So let's take a look at some prices and where things are at today. This is the CME feeder cattle futures closing price as of yesterday. So this is the next 4 months, August and through November. And we see that the range from 158 up to 166 with kind of a trend upward. But of course, this is on the National Board of Trade. So these are feeder cattle. So in the equation, that's just the futures part of the equation, which of course influences what we have in the local cash market, but isn't all of it. Keep in mind that the feeder cattle futures contract does have specs to it, and each contract is 50,000 pounds, of course. But the big thing is that they're assumed to be 700 to 900 pound medium to large frame steers in particular. So when you're weaning a 550 pound calf, you're not only talking about a different weight range, but in the case of heifers, also a different sex in terms of the assumption of what goes into that pricing. So what do some of the local cash prices look like right now? Well, this is the Nebraska feeder cattle weekly auction averages as of last Friday. So steers, we're 500 weight steers, we're sitting at 164.63, and then you go up to the next weight class and they're at 160. Heifers were at 154, roughly 155 each in each weight class. So when Randy was talking about where the prices are right now, that 165 number that they're tossing out there, kind of makes some sense. But as we see here, a couple of things stand out, at least to me, as I look at prices. One of them is it's a steer price at 164. The nearby futures on that would be the August one at 158. So we're about $6 above the futures. That's actually a pretty tight basis for Nebraska. Our basis is usually really positive for five weight steers here in the state because we do feed so many animals. We, of course, produce a lot of calves, but we feed a lot more than we produce. just so you know, those of you that have been tracking the markets know that our weekly auction averages dropped considerably this last week in July. So if you go back a week, the steer prices were about $20 higher. The heifer prices were about $10 to $12 higher. So depending on when you sell and whatnot, of course, that local basis can bounce around quite a bit in terms of that local demand side of that situation. But of course, the question comes up, and I'm not saying you guys, everybody would have that $1.65 break even that they're roughly that they're looking at, or whatnot, or $1.58 or whatever that would have worked out to be with those calculations. But certainly, we're in the realm where you want to think about perhaps protecting price if you do, in fact, hang on to those calves and feed them and put on more weight. So, what are the risk protection tools that is getting a lot of press lately because they made considerable amount of changes to it over the last 3 years to make it a lot more appealing to producers? Is this livestock risk protection insurance? This is a price insurance product. It's administered through the Risk Management Agency, which is a branch of the USDA, and you purchase it through livestock insurance agents. If you're familiar with the way the national CME options work, it's similar to that, and the fact that it allows you to pay a premium up front to protect a floor on the national price and still participate in the upside if those prices go higher. There's a two-step process to it. If you're thinking about doing something like this, you need to fill out an application with a livestock insurance agent who can then actually sell you the product in what's called a specific coverage endorsement, in which case you actually fill out the paperwork to say, I want to insure so many head at such and such end weight at this price. So if you're interested in this as a part of your plan, go ahead and track down and find a livestock insurance agent you can work with and get that application process taken care of. The LRP cattle contracts come in 3 different forms. The 2 that would be relevant here today to our conversation would be these feeder cattle ones. They split them between less than 600 pounds. It's called weight 1. And then between 600 and 900 pounds would be weight 2. They also split the pricing on whether they're steers or heifers. So if you think back to that feeder cattle contract, futures contract, you know, steers weight 2 is going to track most closely with this feeder cattle weight 2 on the LRP insurance. So let's take a look at some LRP insurance coverage rates that are available based off of yesterday's close. I'm going to start actually with the bottom one here, and the bottom one is steers weight 2, 600 to 900 pounds, which is going to track right with that contract. Now this would be the November contract is what it would be tracking with here, because the shortest period of time you can buy LRP insurance for is 13 weeks, or roughly 3 months. So the contract that was available based off of yesterday's close would expire in early November. So it would track with that November contract. But you see that 166, roughly 166.30 expected ending value. I just pulled a simple sample of what was available. The highest coverage price you could get would be at 165.12, which is almost full price. It's 99.3% of it. The rate is just simply what they multiply by the dollar value that you actually insure, and of course that gives you a cost per hundredweight. So the full cost premium for that coverage would be at $5.93 roughly. The USDA subsidizes LRP insurance, and that's what's getting a lot of publicity lately, because it used to be subsidized at 13%, and they've increased those subsidies considerably. Now, if you insure at the highest level, you get a 35% subsidy attached to that. So that would drop the producer premium down to $386. As you go to lower coverage levels, as you drop down below 95% coverage, the subsidy goes up to 40%. Of course, you're insuring a lower price, so the rate is a lot cheaper, but that would, as of the offer of yesterday, that would have been $1.70 a hundredweight to insure at that. And then if you drop down below 90%, the subsidy goes up to 45%, and the producer cost for that lower price would be down around 70 cents. But you see, you're kind of transitioning through those break-even levels that Matt was talking about, where you can buy coverage up at that 165 level now. And if you're thinking about that and needing that, of course, that's a possibility. It costs you almost $4 to do that. So keep in mind your floor on this national price is really at 161. And then your local basis would be added to that eventually when you sell the calves and actually get a cash price. Just a little note on the pricing of LRP steers weight 1 does track with that feeder cattle contract. The way they price this is if you drop down to the lighter weight animals, it's basically a 10% bump. So the 166 that you see here times 10% puts you up at almost 183 is the expected ending value for steers weight 1 with LRP coverage. And you see the corresponding coverage prices attached to that. The coverage levels, the rates, all of that's the same. It's just the cost goes up because you're multiplying by a higher price. So they bump it up 10% to go to the lighter weight. They basically discount it 10% to go from steers down to heifers. So that's why heifers weight 1 and steers weight 2 will track the same right along with that CME futures contract price for November. So how is this performed? Again, this is the early August. I have a data set going back to 2005, basically taking out LRP insurance on August 6th or as soon as you can thereafter on a trading day, and having those calves insured for 13 weeks out to early November. This is steers weight 2, heifers weight 1. And so the thing I'll point out here is that as you go through the indemnity column, right here in the middle, you see those years where prices dropped, which is in red over here on the left, and you actually got an indemnity from your insurance. Now there's one year in here in 2010 where prices dropped $2, but you couldn't, closest you can insure was a 109.90, which was below that ending value. But the other years, there's a stretch here from 2006 to 2009 where indemnities kicked in, 15 and 16, of course, after our big price jump up in 2014. And then last year where the indemnities kicked in. Now, overall, and we aren't trading on average, but overall, about a $2 drop in that feeder cattle futures contract from early August, early November. That'd be the November contract, about $1.83 here. Your indemnity average in here about $4.72 on this. The producer premium, and I did the actual premium based off of the subsidies in place at the time. Okay, so most of this is at 13%. 2019 was at 20%, and then last year was at 35%. So this would look better in current times because I did it. I didn't cheat or anything here. I used the actual premium subsidies that were in place. But this 472 gain here actually cost you $3.12 to get it. So you net 160, which basically takes out all but 23 cents of that expected drop. Now that's just the averages. The big thing is when you come through and you have these down years, how does it kick in and level things out? And so a graph is probably an easier way to look at that. And so that stretch of time here in 2006 through 2009, the blue line is where things ended up below expectations. So expectations would be right up here, even at 0. But we ended up below expectations for 4 years in a row. And you see where LRP would have kicked in and basically leveled that out for us, with the indemnities taking out part of that and basically leaving us with that $4 or $5 premium cost is our floor on that. So that's the idea behind it is, do you need to protect a floor? And do you want to go ahead and do that now? Now that's just part of the equation, of course, that's the national price. So this is the numbers from 2016 to 2020 out of that last little graph there. And the net LRP effect is down here. So this is just the last 5 years and a positive gain of 25 cents in the last 5 years. Of course, we had 3 down years, 2 up. But this is the Nebraska auction price for steers weight 2. And then when you add in the LRP, you basically get a much tighter fit to that. So the low end was 140 versus 131 on the auction because this down year, we got a $9 indemnity, net indemnity from the LRP after we paid the premium. So it levels those years out for us. One thing I'll point out on this is the basis. Again, this is to November. The actual ending value for this LRP was at 126. 121, so about a positive $5 basis to the local auction average. The next year, it was a positive 13. 2018, it was a positive 11. 2019, 11, and then 2020 was 13. So $11 to $13 pretty much for the last 4 years. And then we had this one really downer year, right? Prices were low, they went even lower. We got a little bit of indemnity on it, but we had a really tight basis on top of that. So you see how this 140 is kind of an outlier there that pretty much stunk all the way around. So anyway, keep that in mind as you look through those possible bases. for heifers, this is the exact same numbers in the top. I just put in the heifer auction price for 5 weight heifers in here. So we still have a 25-cent gain net for LRP, but we kind of see how those compared, about a -2, a +1, much tighter here, -2. And then we had a -3. So that's a basis back to that LRP, and then the +6 last year. So we can kind of see how that evened that out also. So take a look at what you can protect for price, take a look at what it would cost you to get them there, and then whether or not you want to put the protection in place is the ultimate decision in terms of the price protection aspect of it. So that's what I have.
So do we have questions? You can put questions in the chat. Questions for anyone who was on earlier? So Jay, you showed a positive 25 cents. Is that right on your
That's just
over
for the last for the last few years. The other one, and I should show you that to you because it's actually pretty interesting if you go back to the big one with all the numbers in it. Let me blow this up a little bit. Maybe. You guys see that okay?
No, I don't know why.
Yeah, I don't know, but it disappeared on me here. Hold on a second.
You can type a message in the chat section if you have a question. Go ahead, Jay.
Yeah, I'm gonna go back to that slide. I don't know why it's not. Oh, that's why my slideshow never ended on me.
Yeah. There you go.
Okay. All right. Let me get it up here. Okay. Can you see that okay?
Yes.
Okay. So the actual, I showed you 25 cents for the last few years on it as far as things go. But for the net change for these going back from 2005, which would cover more, a couple up and downs in the cattle cycle, it was $1.60, so it's much higher. As a matter of fact, it's the producer indemnity to premium ratio is $1.51. So $1 in for producers, $1.51 out. That's pretty high overall with different examples of this that I have over the years of LRP. So this August to November period, at least on paper, appears to be one where LRP has made a difference in terms of being a positive effect. Yeah, that doesn't mean this year it's going to be so.
Yeah. It depends on the year.
I want to qualify that. Yeah.
Karla, one question for you. So did you change your vaccination program for those calves that you early weaned?
It's not really a change in protocol as much as it's a change in timing. So my vet has me giving the same thing, but we're going sooner, So, and that was kind of my question to him was, do I go ahead and do it right after, preconditioning and do weaning, or do I stay with the same timeline, but he had us go ahead and do it now? So you see what I'm saying? Like, do I stay with the same timing that I would on a normal weaned calf, or do I bump it up? And so we're going to go ahead and bump it up. But that's something that I think you need to visit with your vet about. And then what all we're given is related to what issues he sees in our area. So that's kind of important too, to make sure that you're on the same page with that.
Thank you.
Do you see any difference in health as far as challenges to health by weaning sooner than later?
We have not necessarily, but again, I think that the bigger issues are pre-weaning nutrition, space and cleanliness of the space, amount of space and cleanliness of the space, weather conditions for that calf during weaning, and then just making sure that you're keeping an eye on them in case you do see something that looks like it needs doctored, and get it done quickly. I think getting on any illness that you happen to see with the calf quickly when he's that little is pretty important.
Karla, I also have one more question, Karla, that came in the chat. What are some of the modifications you've seen or done to make sure early weaned calves have good access to water?
So that's a very good question. And I think that what can be really important there is banking your tanks better. If that's a tank that traditionally maybe calves have walked around and tromped around, and so it's tromped out a little bit, you can add some extra caliche or clay or something there to bank that up so that the tank is taller. The other, or not the tank's taller, but the ground around the tank, so the tank's actually lower. And then another really critical thing that we've had to do is change the flow on the float. So you can get a float thing at Baumgart's where it refills very rapidly. And so making sure that the water level fills back up quickly so that the water's always right at the edge of the tank so that they can reach it. Because they may only be able to walk up right to the edge. And then, if you're in kind of a feedlot pen and they have to move a ball or something to get to the water, making darn sure they understand that, watching them to make sure everybody's getting a drink and understanding how to use the water, if it's any kind of, feedlotty water. And I have not, in my entire existence of raising cattle, ever heard of any human dying from cleaning a water tank. And so I think that maybe getting those tanks cleaned really good before those calves go in there could go a long way to making sure that they drink well too.
I have a question about cows. So you wean early. Does that affect cow condition score at the end of the season?
That can be a reason to early wean, is that when we take lactation away from the cow, then it reduces her energy needs, cuts them almost in half. And so early weaning can be a way to help us put condition back on a cow without having to spend quite so much money on her feed. Because let's say a cow needing 15 to 16 pounds of TDN a day to maintain herself during lactation, and I take that lactation away and she's only in her, say, second trimester, early second trimester of pregnancy, she probably only needs 8 to 10 pounds of TDN a day. So we've cut that drastically so we can put some body condition back on her prior to winter. So that can be very helpful to her too.
So
Thanks.
Karla, I know you've done a lot of work with confined cows. What do you think about the trade-off between early weaning and just pulling some of the cows with the calves into a dry lot?
So that's a good suggestion too. And I guess some of our work there suggests that calf, the older he gets, the more he begins to rely on forages, then the poorer quality forage that cow may be eating in that confined situation still doesn't really give him the optimum gain. But if you can have a growing period for a little bit after you do wean for that calf, then a lot of times you can make some of that up. Another option, now that you bring that up, is to have a creep pen. So you have like a vertical creep gate that he can go through into another pen, and you could put some higher quality forages, some distillers grains and mix in that pen that the cow couldn't reach, but then he could still go back through that creep gate to the cow. And so that works too. Again, anytime we're adding harvested feeds and feeding them to them, we're adding some costs there. But, if you don't have pasture, you don't have anywhere to go with those cows. I think a lot of the numbers that Matt and Randy were showing were on the assumption that the cow would go back out on the grass and it would save some of that AUMs, but she would go back out there. But what Jay's talking about is you don't have grass for either one. What about leaving them together? And it's a possibility, but there's pros and cons doing it either way. That calf is very efficient. Keep that in mind. The feed that he uses when he's early weaned like that, he's very efficient in converting that feed to gain. So that is one thing that you do have in your favor if you feed that early weaned calf. And again, if you think about it, if you're weaning between 90 and 120 days, and you normally do 150, 180, whatever, we may only be talking about 2 months of, something a little different there until you're back up to that point where whatever your normal plans for that calf are.
Karla, another thing using some creep feed or getting those calves used to eating feed before you wean would be really helpful to get those calves used to certain feeds. Is that true?
It does. And that's kind of what Jay was alluding to as well, is that if the calf is in with the cow in that confined setting, he's eating out of the bunk with her, he goes right up to the bunk, knows what the feed truck is, knows what the feed bunk does, is familiar with some of the feeds that are going to be offered to them later. So that can be very good. Creep feeds, commercial creep feeds can be kind of expensive. And so producers need to be very careful and go back over some of those numbers that Matt shared if they choose to do something like that, because two things can happen if we're not careful. And I'm not saying a commercial creep feed is bad, but two things can happen that can be bad. And one of those is that it can get expensive very quickly. And the other is that depending on what's in that creep feed, if it's more rumen degradable protein and there's some starches in that, then we can get a little more chunky to the calf, a little fat, and not as much growth. And what we were trying to do was target some more of that additional muscle and bone growth that we just wanted him to get his structure that he would normally get with this cow.
So would you think of using rumensin?
You need to be careful and make sure that you're following the label directions for that and that the intake is correct for that weight range of calf. So ionophores are used some in a small calf diet, but making sure whatever you're doing is not off label would be very critical.
Right, but if you did it properly, does it have an advantage?
It can do a couple of things for the calves, and so it doesn't hurt things. It's just very inexpensive.
Thank you.
So I thank you, Karla, and everyone, Jay and Matt. I think we're at the end of the program. Just want to thank everyone for joining us today. A recording of the webinar will be posted at cap.unl.edu, where you can also register for other upcoming webinars. As a reminder, check the site for a schedule of more webinars for the new Center for Agriculture Profitability. Join us next week at noon for a panel on ag carbon credit organizations. Thanks again for joining us and have a great day.
Goodbye.